Heyo everyone! Since Twisted Ones is not officially released until the 27th, and not many people realize that you could order the special edition early from Barnes& Nobles, I figured I would do a complete and detailed shortened version of the entire story to sate everyone. The book comes with an awesome poster of Twisted Freddy and is hardback. It is a bit more expensive than the regular edition, but is worth it to have it early. I will place the link to where you can purchase this edition of the book down below. This telling of the story that I'm about to do is not a read-through, it is a detailed summary of important events. There's much more detail and a few things that weren't necessarily plot relevant that I omitted, so definitely purchase and read the whole book for yourselves. I just wanted something to get this out there, to get the theorists' gears turning a little bit earlier than expected. Without further ado, here it is. The story starts out with Charlie sitting in her robotics class. She's taking notes and listening to her professor, Dr. Treadwell. Dr. Treadwell is explaining how you should never trust your eyes. She goes on to explain that your brain essentially filters out what is unnecessary in order to avoid sensory overload. It does this by ignoring the things that are familiar. So instead of having to process this information, the brain begins to fill in the blanks with what should be there. She explains that the first time you see something, you may feel dizzy due to your brain having to work harder to render the world around you. Since she had turned 18, Charlie had started having nightmares. She would sense her twin brother Sammy and search for him through the darkness. The connection to him was so strong that she feels as if he were her other half. She comes to a metal barrier that she cannot see in the darkness, but she knows that he is inside the box. In August, Charlie and her Aunt Jen had gotten into a fight because Charlie wanted to go back to Hurricane, and Aunt Jen was vehemently against it. Charlie left against her aunt's wishes, and they had not spoken since. Jessica welcomed Charlie to stay in her dorm with her in Hurricane, and later that year Charlie began to attend classes for robotics. A boy named Artie had latched onto her and began to follow her around, but she did not mind the company. Artie was visibly upset when Charlie announced that she could not join him for their chem project, as she was meeting John that night. Artie tried to ask her about Freddy's, but she was haunted by vivid memories of the shadowy figure stealing her brother away. Charlie escapes from Artie to her dorm room, where she begins working on her project, while waiting to meet up with John. It is revealed that Charlie's half of the room is a wreck, while Jessica's half is spotless. Her project consisted of two mechanical faces attached to a board. They resemble statues, which had eroded away in the weather. The back of their heads were open to reveal wiring and chips. When she turns them on, they cannot see anything except for each other. During the day, she leaves on a device that allows them to hear the world around them so that they can learn new words on their own. Her goal is to have the heads learn language on their own. Charlie shows her project to Jessica, who is a bit disturbed by them. The heads speak to one another and in one or two word intervals. Charlie has deconstructed her toy rabbit, Theodore, and extracted parts to use on the project. Jessica changed the subject to Charlie and John's meetup that night, and tells Charlie about the day that she learned that corpses can be preserved in peat bogs like mummies. Charlie met up with John and noticed that he looked the same, but presented himself more like an adult than before. John reveals he is staying in Hurricane due to getting a construction job there. He is working on writing in his spare time. It is revealed that a storm had wreaked havoc on Hurricane and had damaged several homes, including her father's home. Charlie was unaware of that. She tells John about the dreams of her twin and about how learning of him she had felt whole for once until her birthday, when she turned 18. Now she feels like he is trapped somewhere, like he is trapped in a box, or that she is trapped in a box. She starts to feel uncomfortable and goes to leave for class. Then John asks her on a date, which she agrees to. Clay Burke stopped Charlie before she made her way to class. He asks Charlie to come with him as they are driving. As they are driving, we find out that Clay's wife had left him. Clay asks Charlie how she has been, and she begins to remember a vivid nightmare. In the dream, she sees a shadow with eyes on the door. Her brother is playing with a truck. The costumes start moving and things get a bit crazy. Then her brother is gone and his truck hits the floor. She feels like she is running out of air and calls for help, sensing that her brother is on the other side of the wall. Her vision is going black, her heart is slowing. Each beat fills her with pain. She struggles to call out his name. Clay takes Charlie to see a dead body in a field. He needs her opinion on the wounds of the corpse. Charlie confirms that the dead man has been spring-trapped, but the suit is nowhere to be found. Charlie asks what happened to Freddy's. Clay reveals that they had torn down most of it, but had stopped due to the storm. He says the animatronics are gone, but they could not find Dave's body. On top of that, where Dave had died, they found fake blood. Clay is concerned that since he survived once, perhaps he survived again. But since Charlie had actually seen him die, they decide he was probably stuffed away somewhere in the building after all. Charlie changed clothes and met up with John for their date. They ate and made small talk. They then went and saw a movie called Zombies vs. Zombies. Charlie called out the movie for being unrealistic, that the central nervous system would be gone or severely damaged. John jokes that maybe they kill people for their central nervous systems. Charlie is lost in thought, remembering the dead body. She realizes that the wounds on the corpse are larger and more spaced out than the scars on Dave. So she concludes that the suit must not have come from Freddy's and is actually much larger. Then she has another vivid memory of her brother, them playing with the fur on the costumes and babbling in their own special language. When the shadow took him, she remembers being surrounded by solid walls and calling out for him. After the movie, Charlie and John go to a quiet place to talk, where she tells him about the murder and the fake blood at the place of Dave's death. That night, Charlie turned on her project and listened to them talk. Their interaction made no sense to her, but felt familiar. She asked them if they had been playing a game. She then had a nightmare that the faces gained emotion and became childlike, and she had to save them. The nightmare melded into the closet that she and her brother were playing in, and the costumes resembled a forest. She heard screaming and woke up to herself screaming. John came in, and Charlie showed him her project. She explained that it was a natural language programming project, that she is essentially teaching spoken language to computers, much like how a human would learn language. She explained she used Theodore for parts, and getting him was the only time she had been to her father's house. Charlie shows John a hearing aid type of device that, if worn, the project heads would be able to sense that the person is there, that they will recognize the person as one of them. Charlie went to cover them back up with the pillowcase when the second head turned and stared at her with lifeless eyes. The face was described as looking like a statue, with eyes that were only raised bumps, molded into plastic. It should be noted that this is the same description given to the creation that killed Charlie's father. Charlie tricks Jessica into going into Freddy's to see if she can find some clues. They explored the wreckage and debris. Behind Pirate's Cove, they found a trail of scratches and blood where something had been dragged. They followed it to a door marked Storage on the stage. Inside, they found the mummified corpse of Dave, still inside the golden Bonnie suit. They pulled him out, inspected him, and decided that he was definitely dead. During class, Charlie was taking notes on autopilot, as the professor went on about the brain and how it tends to store memories in groups of relevance. After class, Artie asks if Charlie would give him some help with the day's lesson. Charlie opens up her notebook to see that while on autopilot, she had doodled a bunch of rectangles in every possible empty portion of the pages. She wonders if Sammy had somehow been contacting her subliminally and was giving her a sign. She quickly left and began to drive to her father's house. On the drive, she noticed some vultures circling over a field. She got out to inspect it and saw that it was another spring-trapped corpse. She visited a gas station to call Clay, but the attendant was a teenage boy who pranked her with a taxidermy coyote in the freezer before he let her use the phone. She called Clay, who met her there. They both noticed that the body looked remarkably similar to Charlie. Clay informed Charlie that there had been another body discovered that day. It had been dead for 2 days. Charlie gets the dead girl's address from Clay and goes to check out her house for clues. She discovers 3 huge holes on the ground, and upon investigating, she determines that something must have been hiding in the holes and climbed out. She left and remembered she had to meet up with John for their date. She entered the restaurant and made a scene as she was covered in dirt and messy looking. She went to the restroom to clean up, called Clay, and got the other two victims' addresses. Charlie had another vision of the night her brother vanished, and in her panic she thought she had become locked in the bathroom. She made an even bigger scene. They left and went to her father's house. She couldn't help but feel her father was somehow responsible for this. They went into the damaged house to look for clues. In her old room, she found Stanley the unicorn had been ripped off his tracks. Ella the doll in her closet was unscathed. John found a picture of Charlie when she was a chubby little kid and missing a tooth, but Charlie did not remember the picture. She looked at her closets and realized that the rectangles that she had been drawing in her notebooks were doors, and that her brother must be behind a door somewhere. They went to her father's workshop, which had been completely crushed by a tree. John found a toy, but Charlie paid no mind to it. Charlie admitted that she could sense her brother's presence nearby, but that it made no sense because he died before they moved there. They left the workshop and discovered a damaged part of the house directly under Charlie's room, which led to a room that Charlie did not know existed. Inside the room, they saw 3 large holes in the ground. They were much deeper, but resembled the holes in the dead woman's yard. Charlie was drawn to the wall, which felt familiar to her. It was cold to her touch, but she thought somehow that it should be warm. She placed her ear to the wall and could sense movement. John called to her, snapping her out of the daze that she was in. There was a 4th hole in the ground, and in the hole, covered in just a thin layer of dirt, laid a rusted animatronic. Charlie investigated it. It was bigger than the ones she remembered. The ears were oval, and it had smooth skin and a muzzle. It also had a split down the center of its face, which exposed a metal frame and wires. There were large patches of thick plastic stuck to its face, as if at one point in time it had been contained in something. At first, Charlie did not recognize it, only that it looked like an animal of some sort. It looked as though it was trying to escape, and almost had. They dug up the torso and inspected it. It had no fur, it had no tail. It was too big for a person to wear as a costume. There was a sick feeling of weirdness about the creature, but Charlie felt somehow she recognized it. It was Foxy. She touched the creature and was hit by a pang of nausea, which lasted only a second. She noticed that the left side of the skull had been crushed, and the insides were broken. Just behind the eye, on the side that had been buried, she noticed that the casing was missing. She observed that one of the circuit boards had melted. She confirmed that she had no recollection of her dad showing her this type of animatronic. However, she recognized the parts on the inside as her dad's work mixed with someone else's. Charlie continued to try and dig it out, despite John's protest. Then the creature's chest opened, and it tried to pull Charlie inside, where sharp bits and spring locks waited to kill her. She had somehow triggered the trap. The monster now appeared to have skin and fur that seemed to glitch in and out like a trick of the light. John was struck with severe nausea, but he fought the monster off of Charlie and wrenched its head off. Charlie noticed a high-pitched sound in the air and reached into the animatronic's gaping chest cavity, where she pulled out a small disc about the size of a 50-cent piece. She informed John that this is what was causing the nausea, and she turned it off. The illusion of flesh and skin vanished from the animatronic, revealing a robot with unfinished features. She flipped the switch again, and once more the creature became almost lifelike. She took the disc, and they headed back to her dorm. She went through a box of things she had grabbed while she had gotten Theodore from her father's house. In the box, she found another disc, the same as the one she had pulled out of the animatronic, except this one was busted on one side, and it revealed the inner frameworks with some wires extending out and connected to a small black keypad. Charlie announced that the keypad must be a diagnostic tool and that someone was testing it or trying to figure out what it was. She wanted to explain that there was a joint in the box that her father did not make because his creation was much like a signature and she could tell that it wasn't his. John unhooked the keypad from one disc and hooked it up to the other. He noticed on the bottom it said Afton Robotics, LLC. Charlie recognized him as her father's old business partner and Dave's real name. and that he must have did some creating on his own. Charlie and John decided that to find a connection on the murders, they should start at the victim's home and not the fields where they were left to die in. They found a pattern. Charlie noticed that she had subconsciously drawn a door on the map that they were using. They noted that the homes of the victims were spaced out the same distance, about 3 miles. The animatronics must have been released by the damage of the storm and are traveling in a certain direction, killing people in their wake. Jessica came in and they revealed the information to her. Looking at the map again, Charlie realized that they were headed straight for her dorm and concluded they must be after her. They move at night and bury themselves, waiting for nightfall. That those things must have buried themselves in someone's yard and were going to kill them that night. They drove to the most likely spot, which is a semi-abandoned apartment development. As they drove around, Charlie had a feeling of being locked in a dark, cramped box, unable to move, see, or even think. She screamed to be let out. In an empty lot behind the development is where they found them buried. Charlie uncovered one to reveal the head of Freddy. He looked gelatinous and almost embryonic, and just like Foxy, he had no fur. John and Jessica went to call Officer Clay while Charlie stayed to watch. As she waited for their return, Charlie wondered why William Afton had chosen to kill her brother Sammy, why she had been the one to live. John and Jessica made it to a gas station where the same teenager who had pranked Charlie pulled the same prank on John. While Jessica used the phone, John threw the taxidermy coyote out the door and the teenager took off after it. John and Jessica returned to Charlie and Clay met them soon after. Charlie dug up Freddy's face again so that Clay could see it. Clay then evacuated all of the nearby buildings, telling them that there was a gas leak, and the 4 of them sat wait in his police car. In the car, Charlie began to fiddle with the diagnostic tool and the disc. She turned it on and explained to Jessica that just like her college professor had explained, the device changed their perception of what the animatronics looked like, that their brains were filling in the blanks with previous experiences, the things that they should be seeing. John asked what the point of that is, and Charlie explained it would be to gain their trust, to look more real. And then she was hit with the sick realization, to lure in children. Hours passed, and the teens had fallen asleep. Clay reminisced about the night his wife had left him, and he left the car. Charlie woke up shortly after and roused the others. They all went out to look for him. Clay yelled for them to get back in the car. Charlie announced that the animatronics were gone, and she followed Clay, whose light dimmed out. She ran into an apartment just as a scream pierced the air. Clay shouted that they missed someone and ran blindly towards the scream, which was headed in the direction of the forest. Charlie took off running. She lost her bearings and ended up face to face with a giant wolf animatronic. The creature seemed to have limited control of its limbs, and its silver mane was glitching in and out to reveal the metal framework beneath. The creature doubled over, and its chest split open like a giant mouth. Something fell out of the cavity, and the wolf vanished back into the forest. There was a writhing human body lying in the grass. She was alive, but she seemed to be dying. The next day in class, Charlie puzzled over who the wolf was, as Freddy's had no wolf. She wondered why her father kept them locked away in her house instead of having them destroyed. She remembered a time that he had deconstructed a toy in front of her because she said she did not like it. He never wasted anything, so why would he not have done the same to those animatronics? She wondered if he did it to keep an eye on them, or if perhaps Dave had hidden them there somehow. John found Charlie after class to let her know that the woman from the wolf's stomach had lived. He told her that the animatronics would next be in a place that was completely vacant, so they should focus on the next night instead to prepare for the fight. As for that night, John asked her to dinner. She accepted, saying that she needed to get changed first. Then she nervously stated that this did not have to involve any of the others, since she was the one that they were after. John told her to try and relax, and they agreed to meet at 7. She packed some things, including Theodore's head, and headed out. She recalled feeling like Sammy was on the other side of the wall when she was with John at her father's house. She knew the animatronics are the only ones who could have answers, so she set out to find them. She drove to the next destination of the animatronics, leaving Theodore's head in the car. She wandered into a show house filled with fake appliances. She left all of the windows and doors open, then made her way to the master bedroom and lay on the bed. She laid and waited for the animatronics to come get her. Charlie once again had a vivid memory of the night her brother was taken away. At first she saw a shadow in the door. Then the shadow was a man in a rabbit costume. Fear consumed her as his eyes shifted back and forth between the twins. It had made its decision. Its eyes settled on Charlie, and then once again to Sammy, who was still playing. Then, in a sudden movement, the hanging costumes jumped together and blocked Charlie's vision. She heard Sammy's toy fall, and then everything was silent, and part of her was gone forever. There were noises in the house now. Charlie left the bedroom to explore, and she could see a few shadows out of place that should not be there. She went back to the bedroom and waited, fighting every primal urge to run. All three of them were in the house now. She could hear them each taking a different path, the third one stopping right in front of her door. Then her covers were yanked off, and Freddy's head was resting at the foot of her bed. He had fluffy brown fur, and every part of his face seemed to move independently from the rest. Freddy unhinged his jaw and began to swallow her up. Charlie fought it, but in the end she was scooped up and consumed. Meanwhile, John waited patiently for Charlie to meet him for their date. Even though she was late before, John recalled how nervous Charlie had been before they parted ways. He called Clay, and they met up at the show house where Charlie was just moments before, but she was already gone. They went to a field where the animatronics would have to pass on the way to their next destination, where Jessica drove up and found them. As they waited, John said they might not be heading that way after all, since they got what they wanted, Charlie. John then formulated a plan to seek out the old animatronics from Freddy's for help. Clay reveals that he had hidden the animatronics in the basement of his home. When his wife found out, that was the reason why she left him. They arrived at Clay's house. It was a mess and littered with alcohol bottles, revealing the troubling times Officer Clay was going through with his wife gone and Carlton away for college. They all went to the basement and attempted to rouse the animatronics. John pleaded with the animatronics for help, stating that Charlie had been kidnapped by animatronics built by William Afton. At hearing the name William Afton, the animatronics began to spaz out. John and the others barricaded the door and hid while the animatronics broke free and left the house into the woods. The group followed after them. Charlie had come to from unconsciousness and realized she was trapped inside the twisted Freddy. Her arms were stuck in his arms and went to his elbows, and her legs were twisted uncomfortably in his chest cavity. Freddy's eyes rolled backwards and were looking at Charlie from the inside. She screamed, and he threw himself forward, and Charlie hit her head, succumbing to unconsciousness again. When she again awoke, she was struggling to breathe. Dirt was pouring onto her face. She carefully freed her arms. One of the arm's spring lock had triggered just as she pulled it out. She worked the stomach plates apart until she could thrust them open and dug up through the dirt. There was about a foot of dirt between her and the fresh air. She burst through the dirt and gasped for air. Charlie collapsed on the ground next to the hole until she could muster her strength. She noticed that she was indoors and could hear rushing water. There was a carousel, a stage, and tables with blue tablecloths. Just like Freddy's, except Freddy's did not have blue tablecloths, she recalled. The walls were covered in furs, beaks, and eyes, all looking at her, but they did not seem to track her movement. Some of the faces were painted like clowns, and some looked disturbingly human. Each face or beast was on top of an arcade machine. Charlie had never seen these games before, but she could tell that the machines had never been used. She could hear familiar music playing on the speakers. As she moved on, Charlie became lightheaded. She heard a small child saying hello and tried to find it. As she looked for the child, she came across a large waterfall. She noticed that there was a recording of a waterfall, which was louder than the waterfall itself. There was a path that led to a gap at the bottom of the waterfall. She felt the stones, and they were made out of plastic. She followed the path through the gap and felt the walls, and they were also made out of plastic. She tripped over a fuel can and figured it must be to power the waterfall. She made her way out and heard the child's voice say hello again. Charlie could see the child on the far side of the room and made her way to him, asking if he was all right. In the room there was a carousel and not much else. She made her way towards the child, only to discover an animatronic balloon boy. She turned around to check out the rest of the room. When the balloon boy said hello again, she turned around to see the balloon boy turning to her. She screamed and took off running the way she had come. Something began to burst through the ground beneath Charlie's feet. She ran and hid behind the carousel. As she hid, she felt weak and dizzy and noted that there was something terribly wrong with this room. Charlie stood and ran back the way she had come. She had lost her bearings and her mind felt numbed down. She made her way to the arcade machines. She was dizzy and swaying. The wall looked like there were small things crawling under the paint. There was a ringing noise in the air that she realized had been there the whole time. She tried to find the source, but ended up falling to the ground. She could hear the balloon boy's hello again. She was surrounded by a group of them, all in different colors, and they chased her as she ran. She tried to hide under a table, but they found her. They began to leap at her, first blue, then yellow. The third color, all purple, rushed at her, and her brain came to and she ran. Charlie ran to the stage where she found a door, ran in and latched it shut behind her. She flicked on the light to reveal that she was surrounded by animatronics, parts, and costumes. In the room were various animatronics she did not recognize, but among them was Twisted Freddy. A disembodied human arm brushed against the top of Charlie's head. She freaked out at the sight of it. The shelf was stacked with arms and other various things. She began to crawl through the mascots as the balloon children tried to get through the door. She made it past Freddy and took off running as he came to life. He grabbed her ankle as she ran, but Charlie escaped with him chasing her. She managed to make it to the far door and shut it behind her. On the other side of the door was John. The room was impossibly bright, and the ringing noise was louder here. Jessica and Clay were there as well. The balloon children flew out from beneath the tables and flew around the room. Jessica pointed out that the noise was coming from a row of decorative colored lights from up above. Clay took out his gun and shot out each one. The balloon children were really just wind-up toys, resembling Balloon Boy. Charlie noted that the whole place must be a twisted illusion. The lights were like the disc she had found, distorting how they perceived the world around them. John asked why the animatronics didn't look the way the posters were portraying them to look, like jolly sweet animals. Charlie said it was because they did not have those images in their minds. Instead, they had the images of the monsters chasing them at Freddy's. They were afraid of them, but a kid who had saw the commercials and the posters, they would have seen them as approachable animatronics. Twisted Freddy burst into the room. Charlie told Clay that these animatronics were not possessed with children, and Clay shot it several times. He shot the transmitter chip, and in a flicker of static, Twisted Freddy lost everything that made him Freddy, turning into a smooth plastic figure, a blank mannequin. Charlie felt the plastic and noted that it felt like a cross somewhere between human skin and plastic. From the shadows, the Twisted Wolf and Twisted Bonnie came towards them. Clay emptied his gun into them, but it did not stop them. Charlie shouted at them, asking what they wanted from her. A voice rang through that those animatronics did not care about her, that he was the one who brought her there. The animatronics obeyed the voice of their master, the voice of William Afton. He told Charlie that she had something that belongs to him. He stepped into the light, revealing that he was still a mummified corpse inside the Spring Bonnie suit. He hissed at Jessica not to call him Dave, that he was neither Dave nor William Afton. He is now Springtrap. He revealed that the animatronics were all linked together for choreography purposes, and that now he controls that system, and is the master over all of the animatronics now. Springtrap went on to say that Charlie and Jessica had broken him out of his tomb, but even if they hadn't, his creations would have eventually. He stroked Charlie's cheek like a beloved child, and he told her that he would not hurt her friends, but he needed something from her. Clay told the kids to run to the door as he loaded a bullet into the gun and shot Springtrap. They reached the room with the waterfall. The animatronics followed through the water, which Charlie thought impossible. Clay had poured gasoline into the river, lit it, and set it and the animatronics in it ablaze. The animatronics lost their illusions and writhed as the plastic of their bodies melted away. Charlie took off running after Springtrap, but the others were cut off from her by the flaming animatronics. Charlie felt the tug of her brother calling to her. She ran and ran until she came to a dead end and got disoriented, but she heard a small voice telling her to go left. She could feel her brother stronger now. Meanwhile, with John, Jessica, and Clay, all three of the twisted animatronics were cornering them once more, the Twisted Freddy's illusion flickering and glitching in and out. One by one, each animatronic was taken out by their possessed counterpart. The children possessing the animatronics from Freddy's wrestled and tore apart the twisted animatronics. Charlie ran and made her way to a room that was emitting a blue glow. The floor was littered with blue glowing mushrooms, and upon inspecting, Charlie announced that they were not an illusion, but were sort of real. Springtrap knocked her to the ground and started to strangle her, but she rolled away, grabbing a spike that had been holding a mushroom in place, and stabbed him with it as he charged her again. She began yelling at him to tell her why. Why had he chosen to take her brother? Springtrap said that he did not choose him. Charlie was sent into a rage, beating his head against the ground. She screamed for answers, that he had taken her brother away. Why did he take him? Springtrap's next words struck her to the core. "I did not take him. I took you," he said. She let him go. The others burst in, yelling that the place was coming down. Springtrap escaped through a trap door. The whole building was collapsing. John helped Charlie as Clay led them through a tunnel, down a hallway which ended in a heavy metal door. They opened it, and it led into the secret room in Charlie's father's house, underneath her room. Something had flickered all around them, and they left through a hole in the wall. The lights flickered once more. The walls of the secret room were flickering. Charlie felt drawn to the wall, as she had felt drawn to her brother. She felt like she was somehow in two places at once, where she stood on this side of the wall, but also on the other side of the wall, trying to get through. The illusion flickered away to reveal that the wall was metal and there was a door. The door that resembled all of the rectangles she drew in her margins of her notebooks. The door had no handle and no hinges. It was just an outline. She tried to find how to open it. John had come in, warning her that if she did not leave, she would die. John talked Charlie into leaving with him, despite the pull from the door. Charlie pressed her ear against the wall. She could feel a heartbeat. The door hissed and began to release. Charlie told John that she had to stay, but he told her that he loved her and he would not let her stay. He began to pull her out, but needed her to acknowledge him. She stared into his eyes and felt like she was trying to wake up from some sort of dream, trying to let him wake her up. Finally, she gave in and let him guide her out. She paused for just a moment and was ripped backwards with a tremendous force. Twisted Freddy had her now. He had only one arm and no legs. He had somehow managed to drag himself to them. His flesh was half melted away and bulging in places. It pulled her on top and swallowed her up, snapping its chest shut behind her. Clay, Jessica, and John all tried to get Charlie out, but she warned them to be careful of tripping the spring locks, else she will die. Her arm was outside of Twisted Freddy's stomach as layers closed around her. She held John's hand tight, begging him to not let her go. John did let go of her arm as Clay beat Twisted Freddy over the head with a beam. He knocked its head off. Twisted Freddy was still swinging its arm, but much weaker now. Jessica was holding Charlie's hand now. A click rung through the air, and time seemed to go in slow motion. The body of Twisted Freddy lurched off the ground, and then the horrible crunch of metal ricocheted through the air as the body convulsed, and then the suit fell still again. John ran to her and grabbed her hand, but blood was flooding out and down Charlie's arm and pulled into the floor. Charlie was not moving, and the whole house began to shake. Clay had called in backup and forced John and Jessica out, even though they were protesting and trying to get to Charlie. Clay had told another officer that everyone had made it out, and John screamed no. He broke free and ran back into the entrance of the gap to see a dark-haired woman kneeling in the pool of blood and holding Charlie's hand. An officer grabbed his shoulders and pulled him out just as the house collapsed. John and Jessica sat in a restaurant now. Jessica was trying to be hopeful that Charlie could have survived somehow, especially since Dave somehow managed to survive twice. John wanted her to be realistic and explain that there was nothing more that he wanted, but there was no way Charlie could have survived. Artie, the one from college who followed Charlie around like a puppy, had walked in and asked to sit with them. He insisted that he had been dating Charlie and wanted to know what happened. John admitted his guilt, that the last thing Charlie had said to him was to not let go, but he did anyway, and she died alone. John's mind raced with recent memories of Charlie. A troubling thought creeped into his mind. Those heads that Charlie had been working on, her project, they looked like William Afton's design. He wondered what made Charlie think of that. Marla met with them at the restaurant. She took charge and ordered food for them all. She demanded to know what happened, and they explained to her in vague terms. Then John remembered the woman who was beside Charlie when the building collapsed. He recognized the woman as Charlie's Aunt Jen and told the others of his recollection. They all sat and pondered what to do next, but were discouraged to look for more mysteries on the matter. Jessica gasped while looking out the window. The others looked out as well. There was a woman in a knee-length red dress with long, straight brown hair. Artie and Marla called out to her, calling for Charlie. They rushed to meet her when she walked in. John met Artie's gaze and stated, "That is not Charlie."